Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, it is such an honor to have you here. I've followed your work for nearly 2 decades now, and I want to thank you for everything that you've done for this field and your dedication to it.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this interview.
You speak of empathy a lot in your studies with autistic individuals, and you've come to the conclusion that autistic individuals show a lot of affective empathy, but not as much cognitive empathy. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So empathy has these two parts. Cognitive empathy is being able to imagine someone else's thoughts and feelings. I call it the recognition part. Whether you're recognizing what someone's thinking or feeling from their facial expression, or from their tone of voice, or from the context, it's the kind of recognition part. And affective empathy is different. It's the response part. Whether you respond to what someone is thinking or feeling with an appropriate emotion.
Okay.
And in our studies, what we find is that autistic people struggle with the cognitive empathy, so recognizing what someone is thinking or feeling, reading between the lines, as they say, because it's not, people don't announce what they're thinking or feeling necessarily. You have to kind of infer it. But once they've been told this person is upset or this person is grieving or whatever, then they have an appropriate emotional response. So that's the affective empathy.
Okay.
And they, just like anyone else, they want to alleviate other people's distress or suffering. And I've made the point that maybe in this way, autistic people are the mirror opposite of psychopaths. Because psychopaths have very good cognitive empathy. They're very good at figuring out what their victim might think or what their victim might want, and they manipulate and deceive people by using good cognitive empathy. But they don't care about their victim. That's how they're able to hurt them.
Okay.
And, so the contrast really is that these are like two different diagnoses. Psychopaths, also called antisocial personality disorder, they often go on to hurt others because of their empathy difficulties. Whereas autistic people, as you know, for the most part, they don't hurt others. If anything, they avoid other people, or they often find other people confusing. So that's the cognitive part.
Okay.
But often autistic people want to help others. Sometimes they stand up in a very loyal way for other people. They sometimes become whistleblowers in organizations when they hear that other people are doing something immoral. So I think they've got plenty of empathy on the affective side. They care about others. It's just the interpretation of others that they struggle with.
It makes a lot of sense. I actually wrote an article for Autism Parenting magazine on people with antisocial personality disorder compared to people on the spectrum, because there is sometimes still people that I think that get confused with some of the characteristics. And I said in the article that autistic people might seem like they lack empathy, but it really is that they seem like that. That's not what is actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. You've met lots and lots of autistic people, but so you'll recognize this portrait. But that some autistic people care a lot about animals, and they take in stray dogs or injured animals as pets. Those are signs of high empathy. So the idea that autistic people lack empathy is just not true. But they struggle with cognitive empathy. Sometimes in psychology it's also called theory of mind, being able to imagine what someone is thinking or feeling. And if we think for a minute about interventions, there are now many interventions which are aimed at helping autistic people. For example, to improve in emotion recognition, if they want, or if parents want, like social skills courses where you can learn to recognize other people's emotions.
I think a combination with that and interest-based activities where they're really focusing on the child's interest or the individual's interest and passion could go a long way. I know that my partner, for example, he studied body language, so he had to teach himself exactly what body language means. And again, he's very sensitive, but it's that initial recognition of the emotion or what the person is trying to translate.
You know, the idea of like teaching yourself to recognize body language, you know, that's a very good example, because, you know, most kids or, you know, adults typically developing, you know, they don't need to study this. They just intuitively recognize that aspects of body language mean certain emotions. But you know, for autistic people, they may need to learn it in a kind of very deliberate way. And like any skill, you can get better at it if you learn it.
Exactly, especially if you're on the spectrum, because you might zone into that study so much that you become the expert.
Yeah. And then, you know, you also mentioned, you know, interventions that are based around the person's interests. And we evaluated something called Lego therapy or Lego clubs for kids, because many autistic kids love Lego, as you know. You know, just because it's a very logical activity and it's all about patterns, and many autistic people love logic and patterns. But we, you know, in Lego therapy, you put kids together in little groups, so they're working together. So that, you know, it's an activity that they enjoy. It's a physical activity that they enjoy and that they're good at. But they're doing it in a group, so they're also learning, without realizing it, they're picking up social skills. You know, and we found that, you know, even a short intervention, kids who've gone to these Lego clubs improve in communication, turn taking, eye contact, these sorts of things.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we learn from autistic adults and professors and professionals like yourself a lot, and we include all of this in AIMS Global. But Dr. Temple Grandin also mentioned to me is focus on the child's interest and get them into social activities that they enjoy, because they won't feel awkward when they're surrounded by people that have the same interest, like Lego, or in her case, horses or cattle.
Yeah, no, I like that whole approach. I think it's destigmatizing, because you know, because the therapy or the intervention is based around an activity that anyone could enjoy, whether you're autistic or not, and it's also sort of strength based. So instead of highlighting what they struggle with, you kind of, you know, you bring them in based on something that they're good at. And that's already like half the secret, you know, because you know, that builds self-confidence, and you know, you're kind of using strengths to help them with their challenges.
I always tell other people in this field that if somebody was looking at me under a magnifying glass, I would also feel nervous all the time or anxious. And you know, like you said, strength-based approaches are best, because we're not focusing on challenges or weaker areas, and the confidence is definitely key. I've noticed that with the older individuals too.
So another example is that we developed like a TV children's animation series called The Transporters. And it was aimed at kids as young as, you know, 4 to 8 years old. The animations are a bit like Thomas the Tank Engine, but you know, where the characters are trains or vehicles of different kinds, but they had facial expressions on the front of each vehicle that were actually real human faces. And the goal was to see whether if autistic kids watch these animations, do they improve in emotion recognition. So they watch these little stories. Each episode is only 5 minutes, but they watch them and they learn how facial expressions are associated with different situations. But they're doing it in the context of something that they enjoy, which was, in this case, watching trains going down tracks, or watching cable cars or tractors, or things that are predictable.
That's awesome.
We've found that just having the opportunity to watch these things for 15 minutes a day over a 1-month period led to improvement in emotion recognition.
Wow,
So,
that's amazing.
So it's kind of strength-based, because autistic kids are perfectly capable of watching vehicles and the moving parts of vehicles, but it's also kind of bringing in social skills training or therapy in a more enjoyable way.
Yeah, that's perfect. If you look at younger kids, Simon, what would you tell a parent to look for as subtle signs of a person that might be high in affective empathy but low in cognitive empathy? What would that look like as a child in terms of their behaviors or how they interact?
Right. It's a very good question. So for young kids, I mean, people often say that cognitive empathy or theory of mind is evident in deception. When a typical child likes to play tricks on other people, that what they're really doing is they're playing with other people's thoughts and beliefs, pretending that something's true when it's not. Deception or pretend play. Maybe those are kind of like very clear indicators that autistic kids may not show much interest in deception or pretense, drama even, so that they might, autistic kids, you can't generalize, but they may prefer play that's much more reality based, or where you're perhaps building something like Lego, so I mean, these are just almost differences in style or interests in children. It's not like one is better or worse than the other. If one child is very imagination based and interested in role play and pretense, and another one is more interested in building things, but this is kind of how it may manifest. And there are interventions to look at that as well in very young kids, to encourage them to explore pretense if they want to. I think the key thing about interventions is that it should always be fun, and it should be based on what the child wants. Because the goal at the end of the day is to produce happy kids and teenagers and adults, and we don't want to put them through anything that they would find distressing.
I think that is definitely the key, is to look, if your child's learning naturally, then something is going on that's right. Because if they're not happy and they're rote learning, it really isn't going to make a long-term positive difference, not for their self-esteem as well.
Absolutely.
So, I think we've come quite a long way in terms of intervention. I think there is still some changes that need to be made.
I agree. I mean, I think if you think back, say 20 years ago, when interventions like ABA were very fashionable, very talked about a lot, but sometimes ABA was also quite distressing to watch, that the kids didn't necessarily enjoy it. Some did, but if you're putting a child into a situation that they don't enjoy, you have to sort of think, what is the impact on their mental health? And I think you say we've come a long way. I think what's changed is much more of a focus on mental health and well-being. So I think if you keep that as the overarching framework, then it's probably for the best.
Yeah, exactly. Because I work with autistic adolescents and adults, many neurodivergent individuals, and most of them say that they've got this anxiety, and it stems from childhood. So if we can remember that we need to help with self-regulation, help with self-awareness from a young age, and that emotional regulation, I feel like we're gonna help adults to become more kind of mentally healthy and confident.
Absolutely. You probably know that there's a lot of research now showing poor mental health in autistic adults, anxiety and depression, and other mental health conditions, and that shouldn't be the case. I mean, poor mental health isn't part of autism, so we have to assume it reflects other things. It reflects lack of support or traumatic experience. So anything we can do to kind of safeguard autistic kids so that they're having positive experiences, or just to kind of prevent the poor mental health later. And in our research group, we've looked, I'm sorry to talk about something quite depressing, but we've looked at suicidality in autistic adults, finding very worrying rates of suicidal thoughts and feelings, or even suicidal attempts in autistic adults. So I think, this just shows that this is a very important area, and you have to start young. You have to try and make sure that autistic kids are feeling included, feeling valued, feeling positive. Otherwise a kid could be on a very different track of feeling worse and worse about themselves and dropping out of school.
Exactly, and then it's a spiral effect. I was speaking to Professor Tony Atwood, lovely person, and he was also just opening up about his son, and he said that 1 out of 20 people incarcerated in jail is autistic. And again, that statistic, I didn't think about it like that, and it's horrible to think about this. But it just means that we need to focus more on our youngsters, and also obviously the support for adults and adolescents and adults, but we really need to make a change from a young age.
Absolutely. I think the research about substance use and substance misuse in autistic people is growing, and we have to ask ourselves the question, why are autistic people using either alcohol or drugs of different kinds? Is it a form of self-medication for anxiety or depression? And are there things we can be doing to prevent that, or at least to be aware of it, so that they're getting good advice and good support?
Yeah, exactly. And at least I was watching your talk on IAI with Robert Plomin, and if you know about these DNA markers, or at least the genetics that is within you, at least you know that you might be susceptible to these traits. And the same goes with autism. I know that you started a Spectrum 10K project where you wanted to get DNA samples of autistic individuals. I feel like there was a bit of fear in the starting of the project. Can you speak a bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Spectrum 10K is a project that was funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is a big biomedical charity for research, and we launched the study last summer, so August 2021, and the aim, as the name sounds, we aim to get 10,000 DNA samples from autistic people, so 10K, and that's to understand the genetic causes of autism, and also the genetic links with chronic health conditions like epilepsy. And we had thousands of people sign up for the study in the first week or two, but we also had there was a kind of backlash that many people, autistic people, they signed a petition against the study because they were quite worried about what was going to happen to their DNA. Why are researchers looking at the genetics of autism at all? And most worrying for them was, could this lead to a genetic test, like a prenatal test for autism, that might lead some parents to opt for termination of pregnancies? I think that was at the heart of their concerns. So what we've done is we've taken these concerns seriously, we've put the study on pause whilst we conduct a big consultation with the autism community.
Okay.
You know, because effectively what's at stake is, should we be doing genetics research at all? You know, we know that autism has a strong genetic element, and we don't know what all the genes are yet. So research is needed, but as I say, what's at stake is, can such research be done in a safe way so that autistic people don't feel threatened by that kind of research? And from the perspective of our research group, we've made it very clear that we're not developing a prenatal test for autism. You know, that's not our goal, and we agree that that would be very worrying because it could lead to eugenics. We just want to understand from a scientific angle what's causing autism, and what's causing elevated rates of health conditions like epilepsy, like gastrointestinal pain, like hypermobility. There are lots of conditions that are more common in autistic people than in the general population. So we're going to just wait until and have a good consultation with the autism community, and it might lead. I'm hoping it will lead to improvements in the study. But that's going to take most of this year.
That's amazing that you're doing that, because I think that is the way forward, is to obviously speak with autistic adults. We've got autistic advocates now that we can communicate with. I feel like your intention was pure, and I've followed your work for many years, and I can see that you're an extremely empathic person. And I feel like sometimes that gets misguided with academics. I feel like, you know, if you've got a purpose, and especially in science, that sometimes it gets overshadowed, the empathic side that you show.
I mean, you know, thank you for the kind words. I would say that, you know, autism researchers, the goal should always be to do research that will help autistic people, help the autism community. It should, you know, if there's a risk that research could do harm, we shouldn't be doing the research in the first place. But I think we need this consultation just to kind of discuss, you know, maybe some of the misunderstandings about why is the research happening, and to build trust between scientists and autistic people, because ultimately the best research will be where we can do the research together.
Exactly.
You know, so we want to bring in more autistic people and their parents into the research process to help kind of improve the studies. So it seems, you know, so that it's clear that research is in the interests of autistic people. If we do it together, hopefully there'll be much more trust that, you know, they don't have to worry what are the scientists doing, and you know, are they, you know, what's their agenda. We can just be much more open, much more transparent.
Yeah, that's amazing. The inclusivity of it, I really strive for as well. Especially, we do that with AIMS Global too. We've got autistic advisors, and we would run everything we do and the content that we provide to parents with them. Just the last question, because I know I've taken a lot of your time, but in terms of parenting, you spoke with Robert Cloman about this as well, and he was saying that parenting is important, but it doesn't make a difference. And I think what you said in that debate is, you said that parenting is very important. A loving and caring parent could help a child to develop an amazing emotional response to all of the interactions that they might receive. And in terms of that, do you feel that if parents could empower themselves with a lot of knowledge when their child is younger, that they could help their child to develop more successfully?
I mean, I think this is true of parents of any child, you know, whether the child is autistic or not. That there's a lot of evidence that that negative early experience for children particularly in relationships, with parents, like experiences of early neglect or child abuse, leads to very bad outcomes in terms of mental health. So if we talk about another group of people with a diagnosis, which is borderline personality disorder, sometimes called, I think it's called emotionally unstable personality disorder. So they're kind of revising the language. But these are people, the majority of them have suffered early neglect or abuse, and they grow up, as adults with difficulties in having close relationships, difficulties trusting other people, and being have difficulties in emotion regulation, as you mentioned. So that's true whether you're autistic or not. That we know that if you have a secure attachment as a child, that leads to better self-confidence, self-esteem, and capacity to have close relationships, friendships, intimacy, and that the absence of that can lead to this outcome of borderline personality disorder. So, now imagine this applied to autism. If the child is autistic and is suffering neglect or abuse in childhood, they're going to end up with a very complex set of challenges. So anything we can do again to safeguard children, to give them the best start in life, I think, and parents need to realize that they have a lot of influence. I think Robert Plomin, he's a geneticist, a very good scientist, and he was arguing that genes also play a big role in our development. And people might want to read his book called Blueprint, where he argues this based on all of his own research. But he would also be the first to acknowledge that environmental experience is also important. And the work I've just been describing about attachment and particularly the risk factors for borderline personality disorder really comes out of the work of John Bowlby, the pediatrician. So, and as you know, that autistic teenagers or adults can end up with more than one diagnosis. So autism and borderline personality disorder, for example.
Yeah. What do you think the prevalence is of that?
The prevalence of having both diagnoses? I don't know that there have been good studies on this yet. I think sometimes borderline personality is diagnosed, and the clinician overlooks the fact that the person's also autistic. So I think there's probably a lot of underdiagnosis of autism in these other groups. That's one. Borderline personality disorder is more common in women than in men, just as anorexia is too. And again, studies are now finding that autism is often overlooked in people with anorexia. So I think we need clinicians to be better trained, to be more aware that when they're looking at teenagers or adults, that they should also be looking for autism.
Yeah, I think it is definitely underdiagnosed, especially in females, and that's why the masking is such a big thing, because it's kind of like a catch-22. Females mask innately more, and that's why they're not getting diagnosed. So
yeah, I'm not sure if it's innately more. Society puts more pressure on females to be sociable. That girls grow up expecting that they should, or being expected to be sociable and communicative. And so if you have the genetic predisposition for autism and you're a girl, it may be that there's more cultural pressure on girls to hide their autism. So that's what we're really talking about with masking. And
Sorry, I was just thinking, you don't think it goes back to hunter-gatherer, where the females are more social in general, and the males are out there, not really actually masking, just hunting?
Yeah, it could be, but equally, if there is stigma towards autism in our society, and I think there still is, unfortunately, there may be more stigma towards females. Maybe because of this evolutionary sort of history that females are expected to be more communal, more social. So for someone who struggles with that, or who doesn't want to be, they may have to kind of pretend that they are. But that can in itself affect a person's mental health. Because if you're always living, I don't know, pretending to be somebody other than who you are, that sense of not being true to yourself, that can lead to depression and anxiety.
Professor Simon, this has been extremely insightful and informative, like always. I feel privileged to have had the time with you. I'm going to thank you, and I hope that I can stay in touch with you.
Absolutely, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing. It's been really interesting talking today. Thank you.